Saints, we've gone through in the past Revelation chapter 12, and we see these two great signs. One, this woman, and the other, this dragon. And as we've seen, the woman represents the church as a whole. Much of it just religious, but it's the church as a whole. And in Revelation chapter 12, verse 5 and 6 we see, and she, this woman, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So this represents the pre-tribulation rapture, and this woman gives birth. And this birth is those that are ready, waiting and watching. They're caught up into heaven. They're going to rule and reign with Christ. They're ready. They're watching. And in verse 6, look what we see. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that she might be nourished for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. So you'll have this pre-tribulation rapture. This is representing the male child. This pre-tribulation rapture from the church of a whole. This woman gives birth. Those ready, waiting, and watching are caught up. And for 3.5 years, what happens after they're caught up, after the pre-tribulation rapture? And the woman, those that are left, Laodicea, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God. So God has prepared this place for this woman, for those left, those that go into the tribulation, those saints that go into the tribulation because they weren't ready, waiting, and watching. They fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that she might be nourished for 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And then in Revelation, still in chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, we read again. Now the other sign, the dragon, he had fallen to earth. And in verse 13 and 14 of chapter 12, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So those that are left during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, the woman, Laodicea, that's left during the tribulation, the dragon is going to persecute her. And as we've seen before, these evil spirits can't kill her, can't harm her. She's going to be nourished, as we're going to see something here, another great revelation. Let's see this, saints. So, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So that Laodicea, those that are left and go into the tribulation. Verse 14. And 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, in order that she might fly into the wilderness, to her place. Remember, God prepared a place. She's got these wings of an eagle. She's rising up. She's mounting up during this first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, in order that she might fly into the wilderness, to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and a half a time, from the presence of the serpent. That is 3.5 years again. This is the same thing. This woman has this place prepared by God in the wilderness. And today, as I was making some of my shorts, something else, the Lord just suddenly brought me to this place. I didn't expect it. Because this woman, those that go into the tribulation that weren't ready, waiting, and watching, they have a place prepared by God. And they're going to be nourished for 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Now look at Isaiah chapter 35. We'll see the whole chapter. We'll see this wilderness. We'll see what God's doing for this woman. And it's a wheel within a wheel. It's always been God's purpose. Those that are caught up in the pre-tribulation rapture, it's because they're there. They're walking with God. They're walking in the Spirit. And then they'll be caught up to heaven in the pre-tribulation rapture. But everything's a wheel within a wheel. Once they're taken, God will be preparing the woman that were left for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And in Isaiah chapter 35, we see this. Isaiah chapter 35, beginning in verse 1. The wilderness and the desert will be glad. See this, saints? This is a vision, a revelation of these things. This woman is fleeing into the wilderness. God's word never changes. It's a wheel within a wheel. The wilderness and the desert will be glad. And the wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing and a shout of joy. So, after the pre-tribulation rapture, the tribulation will start as an asteroid hits the earth. The governments will be upset. But the church that's left, it won't be in the wrath of God. The latter-day rain will be poured out upon it. It's in that wilderness. It's in that dry place. It's not blossoming. It's not growing like the pre-tribulation rapture saints. That's the first fruits. That's the ones that were ready early. They were getting that early rain. And they were ready early. But those that go into the tribulation, that gets said in Revelation, God has a place prepared for them. She flees into the wilderness. And what becomes of the wilderness? The wilderness and the desert will be glad. And the wilderness will rejoice and blossom. And in verse 2, it will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing and shouts of joy. The latter-day rain will be poured out upon the church. She'll have more power and glory than any time in church history, other than the early church, and equal to it, maybe more glorious than it. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord. That woman that flees into the wilderness, she'll mount up with those wings like an eagle. She'll flee into the wilderness. The latter-day rain will be poured out upon her. And the wilderness will blossom profusely. Why? Because the woman's there, and she'll have the latter-day rain poured out upon her. And it will cause the wilderness to blossom. They will see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Encourage the exhausted and strengthen the feeble. Say to those with anxious heart. How many of you message me, email me, you're under anxiety, you're anxious, you long for these things, but the world's troubling you. But those that have that early rain, that early first fruits that's ripening, God's bringing that life, that water to you. But Laodicea, that woman that goes into the wilderness, she'll have the latter-day rain poured out upon her. Say to those with anxious heart, this is what the Lord's saying, say to those with anxious heart, take courage, fear not, behold your God will come with vengeance. The recompense of God will come, but he will save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened. These that don't see these things, don't understand. So many of you tell me, I tried to tell them, I tried to share it, they won't listen. Then, once this woman flees into the wilderness, then the eyes of the blind, these that don't see it, will be opened. And the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Those that can't hear what we're saying, those that don't see, don't understand, and the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer. Those that are just hobbling through Christianity, crippled and blind and deaf. Then the lame will leap like a deer when that latter-day rain's poured out upon it in the wilderness. And the tongue of the dumb will shout for joy. Those that didn't have the word, didn't know the word, distorted the word, and the tongue of the dumb will shout for joy. For waters will break forth in the wilderness. What water? From the throne of God that was trickling out in Ezekiel, like a trickle at first, and then it got wider and bigger and deeper until it saw no man could follow it, go through it. For it was a river. It turned into a water, a force that no one could cross. For waters will break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the wilderness, in the dry place, in that place with these dry people. The latter-day rain will come. They'll have it poured out upon them. Everything will blossom. They will speak the word of the Lord. Verse 7, and the scorched land will become a pool. All those dead and dry, this religion, this dead religious Christianity that has no life. And the scorched and the scorched and land will become a pool. And the thirsty ground will springs of water, and the thirsty ground, springs of water will come forth. The living water, that water from the river of life, from the throne of God, will flow into the wilderness and bring life to the dry place. In the thirsty ground, springs of water. In the haunt of the jackals, its resting place. Grass becomes reeds. Remember, in Revelation, it said those evil spirits of darkness weren't allowed to harm the trees, the grass, or the green things. The grass, as it starts to grow, you can go to any dry place. It's been dry for years. Then you get that rain, and all of a sudden the grass, the small things immediately start to come up. Grass then becomes reeds and rushes, and a highway will be there, a roadway. And it will be called the highway of holiness. Once that latter-day rain comes upon Laodicea, but that's to happen to us now. The remnant, the few, we're to get ready. We're to receive that water, that early rain. And we're to bear fruit, the early fruit, the first fruits for the pre-tribulation rapture. But those that go into the tribulation will have the latter-day rain poured out upon them. And it will be called the highway of holiness. The unclean will not travel on it, but it will be for him who walks that way, the truth, the life, entering the small gate, going down the narrow way. And fools will not wander on it. No lion will be there, nor will any vicious beast go up on it. These things will be for the saints, and for the saints that have the latter-day rain poured upon them. These will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord will return to him with their heart and their soul, and they'll walk with God like they always should have, and come with joyful shoutings to Zion, with everlasting joy upon their heads. They will find gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Once this pre-tribulation rapture happens, of those ready, waiting, and watching, those that have the early rain, it's just a small shower, but it'll bring forth the first fruits. Then the latter-day rain will be poured out upon that woman that flees into the wilderness where God has prepared a place for her. Those evil spirits of darkness will not be able to harm her. She's going to burst forth with new life as she prepares. For the bride will be preparing herself for the coming of the Lord. And as he returns, she will have put on those white garments. She will put on her wedding clothes. She'll come out of that darkness, that filth of the world and the things of the world and the flesh. As the latter rain pours out upon, do you see it, saints? She's going to flee into the wilderness. And God's going to pour the latter-day rain out upon her. And there will be that life, that glory, that power, as the bride is prepared for her groom.